With Snoop's case, this guy was finna go to jail for 25 years of life for a murder. I wasn't late to put up almost $5 million for attorney's fees.
I went to Interscope. I went to them and said, here, give me $5 million for Snoop murder trial. They said, you know he's probably gonna lose. They told me, don't do it. You'll be dumb to do it. You're gonna go to prison. I said, all right, a chance I gotta take. All the lawyers said, we can't beat this case. They said the guy who was with him, who's supposed to be the security, has a 9mm. Snoop has a 380. Snoop shot on the ground, the bullet hit the ground, and it killed him, right? But instead, the bodyguard just gotta tell him he was shooting 380 bullets out of a 9mm.
Suge Knight, during several prison interviews since being locked up in 2015, has commented on Snoop Dogg's tenure during his time at Death Row Records, which Suge Knight once owned. He's exposed many things about Snoop's past, including Snoop's murder case, what he was caught up in, which Suge Knight put $5 million towards to help with beating the case. In this video, we're gonna take a look into several Suge Knight interviews that he's done since being locked up and otherwise, where he's exposed Snoop Dogg.
When they ultimately got ready to sign the deal with Interscope, Kenner, Dre, and Suge suspended my GF Music Death Row, started the fraudulent Death Row, and transferred my assets to the fraudulent company.
Suge Knight formed Death Row Records in 1991, with there contractually being 2 Death Row records. The initial business contract was between Suge Knight and Michael Harry O. Harris, with Michael Harris being a convicted inmate who was once in the entertainment industry, giving Denzel Washington his start in a play called Checkmates. Harris was locked up with Freeway Rick Ross, who was implicated in the Iran-Contra affair of the 1980s, which connected US intelligence into narcotic trafficking. Harris had been producing his wife Lydia's album, and Freeway Rick Ross, who was his cellmate, suggested that he get Dr. Dre to produce it. Dr. Dre was signed to Eazy-E's record label Ruthless Records and had gotten Suge Knight's assistance with getting out of his contract. Suge had gotten a copy of Dr. Dre's contracts and took them over to Solar Records owner Dick Griffey, who said it was the worst record contracts he'd ever seen in the music business. The contract revealed Dre to only be making a few pennies for each record sold, which he produced, which was cross-collateralized across the whole label, meaning if anything needed to be paid for, it would be taken out of Dre's pay. Dr. Dre then set up a meeting with Eazy-E, but sent Suge Knight instead, who then pressured him into releasing him from the contract. Suge Knight and Dr. Dre then started Death Row Records, with Harry O reaching out to Suge Knight through Ron Brown, who was an NFL player for the Rams, who Suge Knight previously played for. Harry O then brokered a deal of $1.5 million using fellow inmate Pat Johnson's money as a startup for finances, being for Death Row Records. Harry O included conditions that Suge Knight take on his criminal defense attorney David Kenner to become the attorney for Death Row Records. The $1.5 million had been used to upgrade studio equipment, where Dr. Dre then began to make his debut album called The Chronic. David Kenner visited Harry O in prison, where afterwards, Harry O was rushed into medical with symptoms of poisoning. During his time in hospital, Kenner had a new contract wrote up which excluded Harry O from the company, with it now being shared between Kenner and Suge Knight.
Happiness went to the hospital, almost died from something I ingested. And so while I was in the hospital incapacitated, a fraudulent settlement release agreement was made that I never signed, never approved. And there's no one can show you or prove that I have, because I didn't.
Lydia and Michael Harris both believe that he may have been poisoned in an attempt to bump him off during the process of removing him from the company.
That next day, I got a call. They told me that Mike was in like a wheelchair. His mouth was twisted. And I asked Mike, I said, well, can I give you anything?
The whole alleged poisoning incident happened when Death Row were getting a distribution deal for The Chronic, which was largely written by Snoop.
The one person at the beginning that helped me start Death Row more than anybody, more than Dre, was Snoop.
Suge Knight revealed in a prison interview how he felt as if Snoop Dogg had a bigger impact in launching Death Row than Dr. Dre did. Snoop Dogg was making demo tapes with Dr. Dre's stepbrother called Warren G, and he was then discovered by Dr. Dre for a tape of him freestyling under the name of Snooper Duper. Suge Knight revealed in an interview from prison how Dre had told Suge that he didn't think Snoop Dogg was that good, but he still had an interest in him.
Dre didn't think Snoop was that good because they came from an era where all rappers were rapping like Ice Cube, and they were shouting. Snoop was laid back, which I thought was great because he was more like a tenor singer, just rapping.
Suge Knight revealed in an interview of how when he brought Snoop to Death Row, he changed his image and told him to claim a set.
When I met Snoop, the stage name was Snooper Duper.
which this guy was a really, really nice kid. We gave him an image, true enough.
Snoop was from Long Beach in California, which is a Crip-only neighborhood where he mostly hung out with rolling 20 Crips. Suge claimed in an interview that Snoop Dogg didn't know what set to claim, with him going on to say that Snoop then bought himself into the Long Beach Crips.
I talked to Snoop. I said, listen, pick one. I said, what do they have in Long Beach? They don't have no blood, so you can't be a blood. Snoop was in a situation where he paid to be in the game.
Snoop had his first collaboration with Dr. Dre before he even knew how to write songs, with producer Chris Taylor having to jot down spaces on a pad for Snoop to fill in, for him to then fit a verse properly to the song. This song was Deep Cover, which was the soundtrack for the 1992 film of the same name. Snoop Dogg never knew how to write songs until rapper the DOC taught him how to, with Snoop revealing that he taught him with the song Nothing But a G Thing, with the classic lines being
1, 2, 3 into the 4.
As you can hear, Snoop Dogg began counting bars being taught from the DOC, which was then used to write Dr. Dre's debut album The Chronic. Snoop Dogg was the person who named the album The Chronic, with it being written by Snoop and the DOC. Suge Knight then had to get distribution for the album, which was made through Interscope Records, then being distributed by Priority Records. Interscope agreed to a $10 million deal with Death Row, where they would finance the label and get distribution through Priority for a 50-50 split. The Chronic sold 3 million copies in 1992 for the price of $22 per copy, which generated upward of $60 million, which was 50% split with Interscope. It was during this time when Harry O's assets were transferred over to the newly formed Death Row Records, removing Harry O from the company. Snoop Dogg was up next with his debut album Doggy Style, but a tragic event came his way before the album was ever released.
Rapper Snoop Doggy Dogg has been acquitted of murder charges following missing evidence from police property.
Snoop Dogg was involved in the murder of 20-year-old Philip Waldemariam in August of 1993. Philip Waldemariam was a Crip from the Buy Yourself Hustler Crips in Palms, California. Waldemariam and a group of Crips got into an argument with one of Snoop's friends outside Snoop's apartment on August 25th, 1993. Snoop Dogg's bodyguard McKinley Lee broke up the argument and the Crips left. Snoop, while riding in a Jeep with the bodyguard and the friend who had the argument, then saw Waldemariam in Woodbine Park, which was a Buy Yourself Hustler Crip territory. Snoop's defense claimed that Waldemariam approached the car with a gun, which made Snoop's bodyguard shoot in self-defense, resulting in Waldemariam dying. An autopsy claimed otherwise, however, revealing how Waldemariam was running away during the time of the shooting, being shot in the side and the buttocks, along with a gun being found in his waistband. Suge Knight, in a 2021 interview from prison, revealed how lawyers had briefed him on how there would be a slim chance of Snoop Dogg beating the case due to the bullets which had been found matching Snoop's gun, with their first argument being that Snoop Dogg had shot at the ground, which then ricocheted and hit Waldemariam. Snoop and his bodyguard had two separate guns, with the bodyguard's weapon being compatible with firing ammunition which Snoop Dogg's firearm carried, which was the type found at the scene, with a new argument then placing a bodyguard behind the trigger of the murder weapon, claiming to have been using Snoop's bullets.
All the lawyers said we can't beat this case. They said the guy who was with him, who's supposed to be the security, has a 9mm. Snoop has a 380. Snoop shot on the ground, the bullet hit the ground, and it killed him, right? But instead, the bodyguard just got to tell him he was shooting 380 bullets out of a 9mm.
Death Row placed Snoop Dogg in a hotel under a pseudonym for a month to lay low following the incident. Suge Knight revealed in the same prison interview how he had asked Interscope for $5 million to use in Snoop's legal case, as his upcoming album would be distributed through Interscope. Suge claimed Interscope had told him that he was putting his company at risk, as Snoop would never beat the case.
I went to Interscope. I went to them and said, here, give me $5 million for Snoop's murder trial. They said, you know he's probably going to lose. They told me, don't do it. You'll be dumb to do it. You're going to go to prison. I said, all right, a chance I got to take.
Snoop Dogg reappeared after the month hiatus when he presented the 1993 MTV Video Music Awards, where he then agreed to hand himself in afterwards. Snoop was released on $1 million bail under a murder charge, while he continued to work on his debut album Doggy Style, which was released in November of '93. Waldemariam's parents went on the news to claim that Death Row Records and the music industry were exploiting the incident to sell records due to the publicity it created. The album sold 800,000 copies in the first week and was the very first rap album in history to go straight to #1, with it selling 4 million copies in the next year and 10 million copies overall. Snoop's murder trial began in 1995, but before the trial had started, key evidence went missing from the LAPD Pacific Division's evidence locker, which was linked to corrupt cops of the Rampart scandal. Former Compton cop Reggie Wright Jr. was brought in during the case to provide a new security service, where he began to supply police services to Death Row Records to supply an expert witness if similar cases were to happen. LAPD detective Russell Paul, who uncovered Death Row Records' connection to corrupt cops of the LAPD Rampart scandal, wrote a book called Chaos Merchants with co-author Michael Douglas Carlin. The book had used excerpts from the Snoop Dogg trial, where it was revealed how key evidence was stolen from the LAPD Pacific Division's evidence locker. Prosecutor Ed Nissen's opening statement of Snoop Dogg's trial revealed how Philip Holdemariam's bloody clothing, along with shell casings and a bullet, had disappeared from the evidence locker. The Chaos Merchants book claims LAPD Rampart cop Kevin Gaines had dominion over the LAPD Pacific Division's evidence locker, who had close ties to Snoop. Kevin Gaines was a LAPD Rampart cop who was a part of the Crash Unit, which stood for the Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums. The Rampart scandal was uncovered as one of the worst cases of police corruption in US history, which included the cops stealing evidence from the lockers to help swing cases. Kevin Gaines was dating Snoop Dogg's manager Sharifa Knight, who is the ex-wife of Suge Knight. She revealed how Snoop Dogg would pay cash for Gaines and his fellow cops to provide cop security at certain events.
Even when he worked, they were paid cash by Snoop.
Suge Knight commented on the cops during a 2017 prison interview, where he claimed he didn't know any of them and it was the head of security who knew them.
I never had a conversation with none of those dudes. Never met those dudes. They never worked for me. They knew Reggie Wright. They didn't know me.
Snoop's trial began in 1995, being represented by David Kenner, where he was acquitted a year later, with Suge Knight in a prison interview claiming Snoop Dogg would have been washing someone else's laundry if it wasn't for him.
If it weren't for Suge Knight, he would still be in somebody's cell making dinner, washing clothes.
During this time, Tupac joined the label, and Tupac dissed Dr. Dre, as Dre could have had Snoop's case thrown out a lot sooner, as one of the witnesses had claimed that Dr. Dre was in a car during the time of the shooting, which wasn't true, but Dr. Dre refused to show up to court to refute the claims, with Tupac revealing that this was one of the reasons why Suge Knight and Tupac had turned on Dr. Dre.
Somebody had said that Dre was in the car, the jury believed that. We needed Dre to be there to say he wasn't there, and once they would have saw him, they would have known he wasn't there, and that would have saved Snoop's whole case. And Dre never showed up, he was too busy.
The lawyers wanted to put Dre on the stand for a character witness to Snoop. He wouldn't do it and wouldn't show up to court because he was told by Interscope he's going to prison and he didn't want that bad luggage.
After Tupac joined Death Row, a fallout soon happened between Snoop and Suge Knight along with Tupac.
She asked me on the air, how do you feel about Puffy and Biggie? And I said what I felt. They're my homeboys, I love them. When I got back to the hotel, it was a whole nother atmosphere.
Tupac joined Death Row in November of '95 after being bailed out of prison from defense attorney David Kenner, working on an appeal to have him released. Snoop has claimed he was the one who told Suge Knight to sign Tupac, although others have claimed this isn't true. Suge Knight had been feuding with the East Coast following remarks that he made at that year's Source Awards towards New York producer Puff Daddy.
Any artist out there want to be an artist and want to stay a star and won't have to worry about the executive producer trying to be all in the video, all on the record, dancing, come to Death Row.
This led to the New York audience to begin booing at Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre while they were on stage. Once Tupac joined Death Row, the animosity was heightened, as prior to going to prison, he was shot numerous times in an attempted robbery, while Puff Daddy and Biggie were in the same building when it happened, with Tupac then having anger towards them for not being helpful, believing that they may have had prior knowledge of it happening. Tupac and Suge Knight were now both warring with Puff Daddy and Biggie, with Tupac creating the infamous diss track Hit 'Em Up towards Biggie and Puffy, with Snoop Dogg just recently revealing that he hated the track.
When he played Hit 'Em Up the song, I didn't like the song.
Did you feel like it was
I didn't
too
like
much?
it.
Former Death Row artist Danny Boy claimed a lot of Death Row artists grew jealous of Tupac when he joined Death Row, as Suge Knight now put all of the spotlight on him. Snoop Dogg's cousin Daz Dillinger's baby mother is Kenya Ware, who claimed that Snoop Dogg grew jealous of Tupac after he joined Death Row, as the spotlight had shifted from Snoop Dogg coming off of his debut album to then all being put onto Tupac. Snoop Dogg has claimed that it was fine in the beginning, but it took a turn once it seemed like he had to pick sides during the whole East Coast West Coast beef. Death Row, including Snoop and Tupac, went to the MTV Awards in September of '96, which took place in New York. Snoop Dogg had done an interview on the radio while there, where he refused to join the side of Tupac and Suge Knight and gave props to Biggie and Puffy. Tupac's bodyguard Michael Moore revealed how Tupac was absolutely livid towards Snoop Dogg after this, which is visible during an interview done between the two just shortly after, where Snoop looks hella uncomfortable. Suge Knight, during a prison interview, claimed that Tupac and Snoop Dogg hated each other during the time.
Pac and Snoop at the end hated each other because of the jealousy of Tupac. Because Tupac was all of a sudden now, he's this major star, and he getting all the light, he getting all the attention.
Dr. Dre had also left Death Row during this time as he disliked the atmosphere that was forming around it. After the uncomfortable interview while flying back from New York, Snoop Dogg claimed he had one of the scariest flights of his life, where he held a knife and fork in his hand the whole time, as Suge Knight and Tupac were giving off bad energy towards him.
Knife in my hand, fork in my hand, and just sleep the rest of the ride. Because I feel like they finna try to do something to me.
When the plane had landed, Snoop Dogg asked Tupac if he was going to Las Vegas, which was an upcoming trip, but Tupac ignored him and continued walking.
We meet right here. I'm like, cuz, you going to Vegas? He do me like this.
Snoop Dogg didn't go to Las Vegas, with his cousin Daz Dillinger revealing something kinda sus in a Vlad TV interview. In the interview, Daz is speaking negatively on Suge and claimed he could have jumped out on him in Vegas, but he said, quote, "It was killing me, but Snoop was like, hold on, don't F this up," unquote.
I could have jumped out on his ass in Vegas, but it was killing me, but Snoop was like, hold on, don't f this up.
Tupac and Suge Knight were shot at over 11 times while in Las Vegas, with Tupac ultimately dying from the wounds. Suge Knight was sent to prison for a probation violation for assaulting Orlando Anderson, which took place hours before the shooting, with people then believing Orlando Anderson to be the triggerman. Suge Knight, in a 2020 prison interview, claimed Orlando Anderson was not the shooter, and named the crooked cops who Snoop once paid cash to for protection, and Snoop Dogg's ex-manager allegedly being involved in the incident.
The sad thing about it, Orlando wasn't even the shooter, They said that, but that's not at all.
Fox News had obtained a confession letter which made allegations of Snoop Dogg's cousin Lil Half Dead being the alleged triggerman, who featured a picture of himself depicted as the Terminator on his album cover called Dead Serious, in what resembles Can-Am Studios, which was Death Row Studio, along with people shot who resemble Tupac and his artist Shaki Gaddafi, who was killed a few weeks later after witnessing the crime and saying that the shooter was not Orlando Anderson. Snoop Dogg had left Death Row shortly after.
Suge Knight recently said he used to be a superstar and now he's just a no-limit soldier. What do you say to that?
Nothing. He used to be a CEO, now he's just an inmate.
While Suge Knight was going through his probation violation, Snoop Dogg's second album was released under Death Row in November of '96 called The Dogfather. The album wasn't as successful as his debut album, with it selling 2 million copies, compared to his debut album, which sold 10 million overall. Fans began to complain how the songs sounded too much alike, not offering variety, with Snoop claiming Death Row's response echoed that of the fans, claiming that there were whisperings of saying he was washed up and was not like he had been when he was younger. Biggie Smalls was killed in a drive-by shooting while in Los Angeles on March 9th, '97. Snoop Dogg, following this, according to former Death Row head of security Reggie Wright Jr., called him in fear, believing he was going to be the next rapper to be killed. Kevin Gaines, who was one of the crooked LAPD Rampart cops who Snoop Dogg was paying cash to for supplying security, had been later included in a civil trial against the LAPD from the family of Biggie Smalls, which made accusations from testimonies of how Kevin Gaines was allegedly supposed to cut off Puff Daddy's car for him to have been the one to have been killed, but Puffy's bodyguard Eugene Dill told the driver to run the red light, which resulted in Biggie taking a hit instead. Kevin Gaines was murdered 9 days after the Biggie Smalls assassination after being gunned down by a fellow cop, which then uncovered the officer's ties into Death Row Records after it was discovered that his assets had been under Snoop Dogg's manager's name, who was also Suge Knight's ex-wife. Snoop Dogg desperately wanted to leave Death Row Records, and many people visited Suge Knight in prison to make offers, with one being president of Def Jam, Lyle Cohen. Suge had asked for over $10 million for a deal with Def Jam, then allegedly spat in Lyle Cohen's face after a deal couldn't be reached. Master P from No Limit Records paid Suge Knight $3 million to have him released from Death Row. Suge Knight and Snoop Dogg's beef continued after this. Suge Knight, during a prison interview, had even made accusations of Snoop Dogg being a snitch.
We beat a murder trial for him, but then he was on probation. If you get a guy that constantly getting in trouble and never gonna come to prison, that's because he's an informant. He's a rat, a snitch.
Suge Knight, when he was about to be released from prison the first time over, put up death threats towards Snoop Dogg on the Death Row website. In this video, we took a look into several times Suge Knight has spoken on Snoop Dogg during his prison stint and elsewhere. He's revealed a lot about Snoop, including details about his past murder case. Snoop Dogg went on to acquire some rights to Death Row Records in 2022, where he reintroduced Harry O to the brand after he got pardoned from prison for a request to the president. Let me know what your thoughts are on all this in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, smash the thumbs up button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and press that bell button so you can get all the future notifications for when I upload. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.